Hello YouTube! Today, as I was working on the forearm master plan and the shoulder exercises still list for you guys, I stumbled upon a video by someone that I hadn't watched in many moons. And that someone is Mark Rippetoe. Now, for those of you unaware of who Rip is, he's famous for popularizing strength training via his program Starting Strength. A program that was at some point the most popular program out there, even for people who are only interested in bodybuilding. And usually the men that jumped on that program thinking it was going to make them aesthetic quickly found out that it did the exact opposite because the program is garbage for bodybuilding. But you can't really blame these guys for making that mistake, since Rip himself back in the days used to say that the best way to get big as a natural was to train for strength. So I wasn't really surprised watching that video today to realize that he still repeats the same things to this day. His discourse has not changed at all. And it reminded me of why I started this channel in the first place. Because I was extremely frustrated with the way bodybuilding was being portrayed on this platform. And I was tired of powerlifters butting in and swerving outside of their lane, giving advice to people who want to be aesthetic, even though their advice for the most part is horrible. At this point, you guys are getting used to hearing me rant about powerlifting dogma. And you might even wonder if it's going to end someday. Is the battle between bodybuilding and powerlifting going to actually have a conclusion? I think that the answer is no. Because there are some sensible powerlifters who have understood that they have to just focus on strength and let us do our job. But you also have dudes like Rippetoe who for some reason seem to believe that we're completely incompetent, so they have to do our job for us. I almost feel like I'm fighting off a bunch of raccoons that are trying to dumpster dive in my back alley for the remnants of pizza in my garbage can, and I have to shoo them away every single time, and they come back every single time because they haven't heard their lesson. So today is going to be another round of me trying to shoo away the raccoons, because I think that Rippetoe is really the king of raccoons. And even though Starting Strength is clearly not as popular as it used to be back in the days, and Rip is not as prevalent as he once was, I still think that, again, the ideology he created needs to be combated because it gave birth to a training methodology that still to this day ruins people's physiques. But how so? How is it possible that someone's advice that is still pretty pertinent in relation to lifting weights could be so potent as to potentially destroy your physique and make you look terrible? Well, the first reason is the rejection of exercise variety. If you train for bodybuilding, you want to develop the entire body, so by definition, you're going to do a variety of different lifts that target all the muscles. But if you listen to Rip or all of these powerlifting gurus that push the dogma, they'll tell you that this is useless. What you should be doing instead is you should be taking a compound movement and rely on that compound movement to get all the development that you need. And this is directly visible in Starting Strength. Starting Strength is squat, bench, deadlift, overhead press, a clean or potential row, and then if you're lucky, pull-ups. But that also still ignores the majority of isolation movements, in reality, all of them. And the only way that you could believe that this is a good idea is to buy into the notion that a compound movement is going to take care of the entirety of the muscles.
If you couple the squat with the deadlift, with the overhead press, and with the bench press, and then you chin, and you do your cleans, every muscle group, every muscle belly in the body gets work.
And you know, I think that if it weren't for him saying that, you would be mutely able to tell that this is nonsense. But I guess because he has this aura of credibility and also all this history behind him, many people just sort of take it at face value and never question these statements, even though if we were to just stop for a second and observe it logically, you would realize that this is nonsense. So let's try to see if powerlifters are correct when they say that compounds is all you need. We're going to take all of the compound movements I just cited, I'm going to be extremely generous, and we're going to see if all of the muscles of the body are being hit. So let's start with the big three, right? The big three apparently will get you massive if you only spam it. Okay. What does the bench press work? The bench press works your chest, it works your delts, some heads of the delts. I would argue that the real delt is being neglected, and it works your triceps, mostly the presses, so the lateral head, the long head is mostly ignored. Then you have your squats. What do the squats train? The squats mostly train the quads, the hamstrings to some extent, the glutes, and the musculature of the hips. It does not train the calves, unlike what Rip likes to say. Then you have the deadlift. So the deadlift is the big one because many people think that it's the king of all exercises, therefore it is the best for hypertrophy. It is the best for overall tonnage, but for hypertrophy, I mean, again, you train your posterior chain, so glutes and hamstrings, the lower back to a great extent. You get some upper back development, the traps in particular, but the lats, the small muscles of the upper back, all of that is ignored. And the front of the body, excluding the core, is also entirely ignored. So with these three movements, we see that not only are the muscles that are supposedly hit, like the triceps again, or some small muscles of the back or the legs, are not actually hit entirely, but you also have a long laundry list of muscles that are just completely ignored. Example, the biceps. The biceps are never worked in any of the big three. Okay, let's add the overhead press and let's add the rows. The overhead press will train the shoulders tremendously to a good extent. The triceps, the long head is still completely neglected. Then you have the rows. Okay, so you're going to get some lats. I would still argue that you get a ton more posterior chain, some upper back. Again, while the biceps? Where's the neck? Where's the calf isolation? Where's the forearm isolation? While the abs, right? These people, Ripoto, for example, would tell you that it doesn't matter if you don't train abs directly because bracing is going to take care of it. But how many of the people who only do bracing and compound movements have good abs? I would argue a very small percent of them. Why? Because they're not actually working the muscle directly. So this notion of compounds taking care of everything is wrong. Compounds take care of many things at once, but are not as good for precision. People look at quantity over quality. So they see compounds as a way to put on a lot of mass at once, which is a good assessment of that type of lift, but they don't necessarily really care if the small muscles are taken care of as long as they get quote unquote big. Now, it is true that powerlifting will get you big, but in what fashion? Bodybuilding, as I said in the past, is not the sport of piling up as many turds as possible to see who can make the bigger shit statue. It's the sport of seeing who looks the best. So if you just get big for the sake of getting big, but you're not aesthetic, you're completely missing the point. This is explained by what I call big mover mindset, and it's a question of priority. For a powerlifter, the only thing that will matter is the big movers, aka the muscles that will move the weight and therefore make them stronger. I think that this is a valuable mindset to have, and it's very logical if you're a powerlifter. The issue is when, again, these very same people take that mindset and they try to pretend that this is the best for everything. This is when you run into an ideology that now creates horrible physiques, because the majority of powerlifters are totally imbalanced in terms of muscle development. It doesn't matter to them because it's not their sport, but for you, again, who started training, not giving a single fuck about the big three, you will end up with the same exact physique because you will follow the same exact methodology. And this is really my issue with people like Ripoto. It's that they misled people by being openly dishonest. To me, if a powerlifter wants to come out and say that the squat is the best way to get bigger legs, I'm not going to argue with that because I agree. But when someone like Rip claims that the squats and deadlifts work the calves better than calves raises,
Your calves are working very, very hard in a squat and in a deadlift. All right, people think you have to do calf raises to work calves. No, that's not what happens. You don't need to do calves.
this is where you see the dishonesty of the powerlifting dogma, because Rip could just, again, say that he doesn't really care if the squats or deadlifts develop the calves because the calves are a small muscles, they're not a big mover, so they're entirely useless. But he doesn't do that. He goes out of his way to claim that not only are they worked on these movements, they're worked better than with isolation work. And usually what happens when you end up swerving out of your way and giving advice that you're not qualified to give is that you end up giving pretty shitty arguments. So an hilariously bad explanation that I heard from Ripoto explaining why compound movements were better than isolation for developing small muscles is that apparently in his head, soreness is not correlated with muscle growth, which is true. Compound movements don't make these small muscles like the biceps sore. Therefore, this must mean that compound movements are better for muscle growth than isolation, because isolation movements have a tendency to make muscles sore. If you think this is stupid, understand that it took me like a good 5 minutes to wrap my head around this one.
A variety of exercises only ensures that you're going to get sore. All right? And soreness is not a factor in the production of strength. Going up 5 pounds on your squat every workout is the primary factor in the production of strength. Lifting more weight is what makes you stronger.
Right, Rip has this boomer energy to him where there is his way, and his way is the correct way, and anything outside of it is just wrong. And he will not explain to you, or if he does, he's going to use flawed logic like this, and I guess that it's enough for some people and they just follow him blindly. But the problem down the line is that reality doesn't reflect that level of shitty argumentation. And I think that the best example of that is the SS transformations. So a lot of people took pictures before doing starting strength and afterwards. And for the most part, these pictures became legendary because they were turned into memes. For the most part, what happened to the young guys who did this is that they just got fatter or they got visibly less aesthetic, meaning that their physiques actively regressed following that method. So how exactly is this possible? Well, it's for the reason I just explained. If you don't have in your program a specific lift to target a specific muscle, that muscle will not grow. But the other muscles that the compounds hit in priority will grow. So if you look at the people who do starting strength, for the most part, what ends up happening is that they end up with massive legs and no upper body whatsoever because most of the movements they do develop the posterior chain. Squats, deadlifts, and rows, for the most part, develop the quads, the hamstrings, and the glutes. You will never have a matching upper back simply because you do not have the amount of volume and specific training directed to the upper back in particular to actually make up for the amount of volume that you do for the legs. It's only logical. But of course, if you listen to someone who tells you that the only thing you need for upper back is deadlifts and rows, you will never actually be able to know why you fucked up and why your transformation didn't actually go in the direction that you planned. And this has given birth to an offshoot of horrible bodybuilding advice that still persists to this day. People will tell you that, oh, if you want bigger triceps, just bench more. Get your bench up and your triceps will grow. Well, what if the main mover of the bench is my pecs? What if my pecs and delts do most of the work? I can improve my bench by 200 pounds. How many of that goes to my triceps? The answer is almost nothing. And this is the big issue with relying on compound movements to get bigger. Sure, they'll get you bigger, but what exactly is going to get bigger? The part of the body that moves the weight in priority. For a big mover, that is great because they get stronger, they don't care what grows. But for you, it's an issue. This is why isolation exercises, which by the way have been designed to isolate a muscle in particular so as to make sure that another bigger muscle doesn't steal the work and ruin your hypertrophy training. That really is the issue with compounds. Sure, they get you very big, but you don't really get to pick what gets big. And unless you modify the form a lot, the thing that got big at the start from the compound is always the one that will get big. And with time, the bigger it gets, the more it's going to steal the work from the rest of the body. So the less potent for the small muscles the big compound movements become. And this is really the reason why something like starting strength is an atrocious bodybuilding program. It neglects to develop those small muscle groups early on, which means that by the time you finally catch up to the fact that isolation movements are an absolute necessity for all lifters, you have so much development for the compound movements and the muscles that grow from them that trying to make up for that deficit becomes extremely difficult. And something that you will hear a lot people say to defend the program is that it works and it got them bigger. But that is not through any merit of Ripeto or starting strength. It's just that the program features compound movements, and compound movements make you big. That is the truth. But look at the type of physiques that it actually produced. That should be a clear proof that trying to get big with no actual methodology outside of just get stronger results in terrible aesthetic physiques and actually ruins physiques. And that is because starting strength was never designed as an aesthetic or bodybuilding program. It's in the name, starting strength. And yet, Rip, again to this day, if you ask him, hey, how do I get bigger and I get a more muscular body, he will direct you towards starting strength. And not only just that, it's not just the fact that the program is hyperminimalistic and has no isolation movements. It's also that even with the compounds, the focus is clearly on strength progression at any cost. At this point, I think that it's almost mimified how obsessed with strength and weight on the bar Rip is.
You want to get real big? You want to get big legs, big back? Get your squat from 135 up to 405. Get your deadlift up from 185 to 495.
If you listen to the guy, to him, If you want to get bigger, it's simple. You go to the gym, and every time you do a deadlift or a squat, you add 5 pounds, and that's it. That is the simple solution to getting big. Everything else is just fluff. It's just powder in your eyes that is going to do nothing. Curls, useless. Actual schemes and progressions for rep ranges that are going to help you accumulate volume, worthless. Just do a 5x5 until the day you die. Now, we already saw that even if that were possible, it would leave you horribly malformed because you would only get stronger on the compounds, so only your strong points will be developed. But it's also that this is not actually possible, because anyone who has actually tried to just do weight on the bar for progressive overload knows that at some point you plateau, and you plateau hard. Starting strength has the worst plateaus of any programs because the program is designed in such a way that you are going to plateau. The program forces you to plateau, and once you plateau, the solution outside of the plateau is idiotic because there's no solution. You're just told to try again, and then try again, and then try again until it finally works. And that is because outside of being the king of raccoons, Rip is also a bull. His approach to progression is straightforward to the point that it becomes simplistic. And his idea of what will get you big is connected to that, because to him, if you want big legs, just get a 4-plate squat. How do you get to a 4-plate squat? Well, just add 5 pounds and do a 5x5 and you'll get there. This is my issue with people who say that if you want to get bigger, you just have to get stronger. It's because this is a simplistic explanation, and then when you ask them to actually exemplify and tell you how you're supposed to make that happen, they tell you something like this of, oh, just get stronger. How? By getting stronger. Well, thank you very much, oh genius, but that doesn't solve my problem. And on top of that, a 4 or 5 squat doesn't guarantee big legs. You could be someone who is posterior chain dominant, you're going to get massive hamstrings and glutes, and your quads are not going to develop as much as they would if you did something like a high bar squat with a much more conservative rep range and you focused on actually targeting the quads. Because again, surprise, surprise, yes, the squat is a great compound movement for the legs, but you can find ways to skew the development of the quads even more. And that is because compounds in themselves can be turned into pseudo isolation movements. I know that just by saying that, it is a great blasphemy in the eye of people who love starting strength, but compound movements are not sacred. For bodybuilders, they are just means to develop muscles. So if there is a way to skew a compound towards the muscle I want to develop more, I will do it, even if it makes me weaker. And I would argue, especially if it makes me weaker, because it proves that I'm actually using the muscle I want to use and I'm not just brute forcing my way through the movement. And this is why I've been telling you guys to not rely on strength standards, because strength standards sort of become their own goals in a sense. You're going to shoot for a 4-plate squat because you want to get bigger legs. Why not focus on getting bigger legs and not caring about the 4-plate squat? Hypertrophy training doesn't have to be super complex, but reducing the development of a muscle to the simple parameter and variable of strength is insulting to bodybuilding. When someone tells you that to get big legs, you have to get a 4-plate squat, your answer should be, okay, with what rep range, with what lift, what specific type of squat, with what amount of weight put on my body, aka what type of caloric increase or deficit am I on, and also why. Why am I trying to get to this in particular, and isn't there a better way for me to do that? Well, the answer is, of course, there is a better way. And to find that better way, you have to focus on the one aspect that strength standards never actually take into account or just brush aside, and that is the timeline. Because getting someone to a 2-plate or 3-plate bench in a year is not the same thing as getting that same person to that same weight in 3 or 4 years. And that is because how strong you get matters less than how much time it took you to get strong, because this directly correlates to quality volume accumulated over time. Someone like Ripper, the people who push the powerlifting dogma, will tell you that the faster you can get to a 4 or 5 squat, for example, the better, because hitting that magical number means that you'll get big legs. Anyone who knows anything about hypertrophy knows that this is nonsense. For the most part, reducing the amount of strength progression and doing more volume as you progress in weight is going to get you much better results in terms of hypertrophy. And I know that this is a mindfuck for many because they see strength standard as this magical button to push, as if you just get to 4 or 5 and you get the big legs button and that's it. But how did you get to that 405? Again, what rep range did you do and how many years, how many reps, how many sets, how much volume? This matters much more than the strength that you got and the number that appears on the page at the end of the journey. This is vital to understand, because if you don't, you're never going to be able to break away from that type of mindset that ruins physiques.
Sets of 5 make you stronger than sets of 10, because 5 is a heavier weight than 10. The process of getting strong requires that you grow.
And this is why something like 5x5 is not that good for bodybuilding. It's because the one variable that can actually be modified to be able to progressively overload is weight on the bar. So you don't have a choice. You have to get stronger. Look at something like a 3x8 to 10 or 3x8 to 12. Now the reps change. Therefore, you can have more volume and you can spend much more time accumulating that volume, but it will at the end of the day result in less strength accumulation. Which one is better for strength and which one is better for size? The answer is obvious. But the problem is that I have heard Ripoto himself say that something like an 8 to 12 is garbage for both size and strength, and that is because, again, he's the raccoon that is trying to dumpster dive in the two garbage cans at the same time of size and strength, which means that he is going to give good advice for one, strength, but for the other, it is not applicable. It's just going to result in people not getting the body that they want.
All of this shit, 8 to 12 reps, 5 to 6 sets, on 15 different exercises, it's all bullshit.
Unless you deadlift 650 pounds.
And that is because the pursuit of absolute strength is always at odds with the pursuit of aesthetics. This is why it's impossible to claim that size equals strength. Because if you want pure strength, you're going to have to make some sacrifices in terms of aesthetic. Something, for example, like an aggressive bulk will be amazing for your strength, but it might very well destroy your physique. This is the starting strength physique, all of these guys that end up fatter than when they started with giant glutes and giant legs. Why is the reason for this? Well, it's because they started regarding progression and the strength that they wanted as the end goal instead of looking at it as a mean. For a bodybuilder, strength and weight on the bar is just a mean. It's a way to keep stimulating the muscle so as to get more growth that starts and ends there. Ultimately, this is the real difference between training for size and strength. You still do your compounds, you still lift dumbbells and barbells, you go to the same gym as a powerlifter, but your intent is different, and that is what is going to define what you're going to look like at the end of the day. But people lose sight of that original goal and purpose that they had, one, because they are being lied to by people like Rip, but also because it is a truth that strength training is much more stimulating than hypertrophy training, which is interesting because Rip claims that chasing soreness is much more instantaneously gratifying than doing something like strength training, but I disagree. I think that people get hooked on programs like Starting Strength because it's very exciting to put weight on the bar every week. You have a clear proof that you are progressing in the gym. But the issue is that this is taking you away from the proper mindset that would get you bigger, because now you hyper-focus on weight on the bar and you're not focusing on volume, which is what would result over time in the most muscle growth. And this is why I always get miffed when I hear that type of influencer tell people that hypertrophy training is just silliness and to just focus on getting stronger. It's because to me, it's infantilizing and it's trying to keep people in this very childish mindset of just hyper-focus on this one thing and you will get everything you've ever wanted. Across the board, this never works in life. If you want something in particular, you have to attack this specific thing in particular. Because if you keep your eyes off the prize, eventually you also lose sight of the prize. And you might even come to forget that's what you wanted in the first place. Just take one look at the amount of people with small arms who complain about not having a very developed bicep or tricep, but who also either never actually isolate them properly, just do chin-ups and think that it's enough for biceps and bench for triceps, or are very neglectful when it comes to actually applying proper methodology to the training of the arm. Well, they'll be super anal about their squat, bench, and deadlift because these are the big compounds and they must be respected, but that isolation is just an afterthought. Or they'll skip it, or they'll do 3 sets with just bullshit weight and RP6, then they'll complain that it never grows, but they never put 2 and 2 together. Then there's also the people who just bastardize the movements, so we can thank Rip for that as well. If you look at the way Rip teaches people to do skull crushers, he turned the movement, that is supposed to be an isolation movement for the long head, into a compound movement. Why? Big mover mindset. And this connects to what I said earlier. There is a reason why people don't like isolation as much as they like compounds. You can put so much more weight on a compound movement. It progresses much faster. So what ends up happening, if you give an isolation movement to that type of person, they're going to try and turn it into a compound movement to make it fun. But when that happens, the isolation now stops doing what it's supposed to do, which is isolating the muscle. And so you end up with people who think that they're doing everything that is needed for bodybuilding, but at the end of the day, they're just following a pure strength program that is not going to get them where they want to be. And usually these are the types that will use, again, completely arbitrary strength standards to tell you that if you're not able to match or hit them, then your opinion doesn't matter. So they'll tell you that if you can't bench 3 plates or squat 5 plates or deadlift 6 plates, then you are not to weight in, even though, again, these are things and metrics that are completely disconnected from hypertrophy training and the ability to develop an aesthetic body. If you look at it long enough, you realize that it's stupid. But because these types have such confidence about their own stupidity, you sort of take it at face value. And I know many people who end up believing that if you want a big chest, just get a 3-plate bench and you'll be set. Well, you can get a big chest and never hit a 3-plate bench. It's entirely possible. And also that the majority of people will never even need to get to a 3-plate bench to get a big chest. If anything, the obsession about this arbitrary number will rob them of the ability to develop the muscle because they will hyper-focus on strength. But the worst thing about these numbers is that they're also used as a mean to blackmail lifters into not doing certain things. So this is when you'll hear someone tell you that until you're that strong on this lift, then you don't have to do this because it's a waste of time, which is always used in a fashion to try to discourage you from doing isolation. Like, oh, until you can bench 3 plates, there is no need to isolate your triceps because the bench will take care of it. That's horrible advice. But Rip even went as far as to say that until you can deadlift 600 pounds, you can stay away from isolation for the upper back because it's just a waste of time, just get stronger.
If you are strong enough to deadlift 650, then it might benefit you to do a different type of training. But until you are, sets of 5 with more weight every workout are how you get there.
Imagine how many young men followed that stupid-ass advice and ended up wasting years of upper back gains instead of just doing the normal and logical thing and doing both, doing your heavy hip hinge and then doing lifts that are specifically targeting the area. It's not that hard to understand, but it's stupefying to see that someone like Rip, who is widely regarded as a pretty capable coach, is not able to understand something so simple. You can do 2 things at the same time. You can get stronger on compounds and do isolation. Of course, people like him with the big mover mindset are deathly afraid that doing a little bit of isolation is going to take away from your ability to put 5 pounds on the bar and use your hip drive. But I'm here to tell you that it won't, because the beauty of isolation is that it's in isolation. A set of curls is not going to rob you of your ability to do squats. So do both. And anyone who tells you to just do this, dismiss. I've told you in the past, if an influencer's advice starts with just do this, you are dealing with someone who's a minimalist who is going to just take away valuable work that you should be putting in so that you can hyper focus on things that they deem important and necessary, but that you should remember are not actually important and necessary for you. Ultimately, strength is really the tree that hides the forest for many people, where they don't see that it's just a part of the plan, it's a part of the scheme, but it's not the most important one, and certainly not the one you must prioritize on. Especially if you end up confining this strength to only 3 to 5 lifts. You should try to get stronger on every single lift. And that's actually a very valuable question to ask people who tell you to just get strong. Ask them in return, hey, okay, on what lifts? Unless they tell you on every single lift for every single muscle group, you know that you can just ignore their advice because it's going to be garbage and lead to you having a ruined physique. And I'm going to leave you with that. The forearm master plan comes out Thursday and the shoulder tier list on Sunday. I hope you are looking forward to both, and I'm wishing you a very good night.